So we're here on the Growing Farms podcast today. We're going to talk about fencing systems for new farmers or homesteaders. You've sourced the piece of land. I did an episode on that. You can go check my Finding Land podcast episode. And now I brought on a friend who I think is incredibly intelligent and smarter than me and understands this stuff to just a deeper level. And I met him through the American Pastured Poultry Producers Association, or APAPAPAPA. And Matt Cadman here is down in Jefferson, Texas, which we'll say is northeastern Texas, and
Northeast Texas.
is 1,522 miles away from where I'm sitting right now. And
That's so
without,
sad.
well, it is really sad. Teleportation's coming, dude. We're gonna figure it out, and it'll be awesome.
Not doing it.
It'll be like a zero carbon, very unsuccessful way to
Your soul will
make
get
our.
lost on the moon. All right.
And so I was thinking of the next podcast episode as we're growing farmers here, and we want to, if marketing is the key aspect of what sets us apart in the market of how we reach customers, and for us pasture-based livestock farmers, the best marketing tool we have is our grass, is our pasture, and you have to manage that. And I wrote all this content about how to graze 4 cows on this farm property here in Western Connecticut. And I was talking to my buddy Matt about it, and he's like, "So are you raising 4 cows?" And I was like, "No, I'm making content about the philosophies behind how you manage it, because it is hard to generalize this type of thing, because you might have more cows, you might have less cows, you might have no cows, you might have sheep, you might have pigs, you might have birds, you might have flat land, you might have uh, rolling hills, you might have dry land, you might have wetland, and it is hard to generalize any of this. But if I had to attempt it, I wanted to bring a friend in who I thought would do a great job. So how have I done so far in the introduction, Matt? And if I've missed anything, can you just give us a quick backstory, where you are, who you are, where you're located, what you're doing on the farm, and roughly what your scale is, just so we can orient. But it's not a like, well, so how many chickens are you raising podcast. We're going to get past that quickly and into like practical application and tips.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. And I'm so very excited to hear this genius that you got coming on here to talk about fencing. So who is he?
He's also a part-time comedian, so
No.
it'll
All
be
right.
peppered with plenty of silly along the way.
Hey, I just thought of something when you were doing that little intro there, John. So before we even started recording here, maybe you and I were talking about like, where you're trying to go. Like everything's contingent upon what are you trying to do. And since you were talking about grazing 4 cows, I graze about 100 cows, and we do high density grazing, which I think we're probably going to talk about today. And that means a lot of animals on a small portion of land, and then you move them frequently. And for those of you who don't know this, whenever cows particularly are on a small plot of land, not only do they trample weeds, but cows have a very strategic calculator in their brain. It's like the one thing they do really well. They're like geniuses in this area, where you give them a new paddock and they quickly walk around. They figure out the square footage down to probably down to the square inch, really. And then they figure and then they divide that by the number of animals there. And they say, oh, you know what? We're gonna have to eat the ragweed too, and not just the grass. And we learned this on accident some years ago in a drought, and it was amazing. And you can go back on our Facebook, I'm sorry, YouTube channel, Shady Grove Ranch, and I was just browsing through some of the stuff, and amazing stuff that they do to the land whenever they are in the high density atmosphere. Well, a week ago, I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to move them for like a day and a half. So I'm going to give them, a 2 acre paddock of ragweed. Guess what they did? They
What
went
they
in
did.
there and ate all the grass and none of the ragweed. But like the day before, I was moving them 3 times a day and this ragweed, and they were absolutely cleaning it up. They were loving life. They were enjoying it and eating it all. And and so I proved my own theory again. If they can get away with eating the grass first, what happens is I think they walk all around. They get their cow stink all over the ragweed, which used to be yummy to them, and now it's like, hey, somebody already brushed up against this ragweed. I'm not going to eat that. And so
I
I just posted a video recently, and like you can see this line down the pasture of completely obliterated ragweed and completely perfect lush ragweed, and they were in that lush place for like a day and a half, 2 days, and I was like, I got to move them. They're not going to eat it now.
That was one of those things I picked up, and I could have had. To be fair, I could have had a couple people on here for fencing. Like I love Joe Putnam from Premier Supplies. I
Yeah.
have a bunch of Premier that I've used throughout the years.
He's moved on.
He's moved on.
Yeah, he's moved on. He's not with Premier. It was a good break and everything. He just needed to move
Oh,
to a higher paying career.
all right. Well,
Sorry, Joe.
still
We
tip of
love
the hat
Joe.
to Premier Supplies because they've been good to me throughout the years.
Absolutely.
And
I
then
just bought fences from him.
Troy Bishop, who's been a mentor
Mhm.
for me since 2013. He was a keynote speaker at the APA conference,
Mhm.
and I was working with him, and just the thought of the cows brushing up against and putting their stink on a plant
Yep.
intentionally, in a weird circumstance. Temple Grandin was just in Kent, Connecticut, which is where that's my town. My dad is a psychologist, and he went to see her talk, and he brought me home some signed books, which was amazing.
Cool.
And the animal mind, the visual thinkers, the way animals perceive the world is so completely different than us humans. And getting into the cow's head of having that strategery of, how much space do you got? How many friends and family do you have surrounding you? And then
Yeah.
what are your available resources? And then who's going to get to eat what in the buffet based on where you walk and how you act is just endlessly fascinating. And it's those little minute details that you might lose in a concentrated animal feeding operation where they're in a dirt lot and they're getting silage, on their feed schedule, and they just aren't allowed to have this animal behavior. Now you've got 100 cows out in Jefferson, Texas, and they're exhibiting this normal animal behavior to allocate resources within themselves. And you think as a farmer you're controlling things, but you're
You're
observing,
facilitating.
you're
Yeah, you're
facilitating,
facilitating.
and they're doing the work. And so
Yeah.
that's one of the things that's so hard to generalize all this because there are so many levels and so many variables that the education is so important in that time to linger graze and stop and watch and see how are your animals interacting with your land.
Can I add one little variable,
Oh, please.
disclaimer real quick? So we live in Northeast Texas. Most people think of Texas as like tumbleweeds and like desert area, like hardly any grass and stuff. That's not where we live. We get 55 inches of rain a year, and it is green here. Uh, we live in the piney woods. We grow pine trees really well, but we grow grass really well too. So that being said,
Yeah.
the sweet spot for me, because we grow a lot of forage. If you're into the grazing with some of the gurus, Ian Mitchell Innes and stuff like that, they'll talk about brittle and non-brittle environments.
Yeah.
And a brittle environment is where you get so little and such infrequent rainfall that trees really can't grow because it'll sprout, it'll start growing, and oh nuts, 4 months without rain, the tree dies. Whereas grass can rebound quickly. So grasslands are really good for brittle environments. We live in a very non-brittle environment. So we have huge, I've got oak trees that are almost 4 feet in diameter,
Oh, it's awesome.
Uh, so that
That's
being said, we
awesome.
grow a lot of forage, but we also grow a lot of weeds because of that. And so the sweet spot for me is usually about a stocking density in cattle terms of about 200,000 pounds per acre. And
Okay.
so if I have 100 animals at 1,000 pounds each, that's 100,000 pounds.
Yep.
And so in order to get to the 200,000 pounds per acre rate, I just need to cut my acreage down to half an acre. So I'll put 100 cows on a half acre, but I'll do that 3 times a day. So I usually do about 3 moves. So anyway, I didn't want to like start throwing out,
That's all right.
grazing
Yeah.
density. And
It's
then
all right.
people are like, he's doing this in Texas, and they try it, and then they starve their animals because there's only 3 tufts of grass in a half acre in East and West Texas.
All right. And that was one of the amazing things as I progressed throughout my farming career. And again, this is I got from a podcast that I heard Troy on that, in Western Connecticut, I can every square inch of outside space that is exposed to the sun has something green growing on it. Like you can't not grow plants on surfaces here, even to the point they're growing up the trees and everything's
Yes.
being taken over
Yep.
by this just vegetative mass.
Mhm.
And so we'll say, rough numbers, stupid numbers. It is 2 acres per grass-fed cow per year here, where that might be 40 acres in Wyoming, and just
Yes.
that thought of
Yeah.
like ranging is very different. And so East Texas versus West Texas, very different. So coming away from this,
Mhm.
not just on stocking density, but we're going to go into the general philosophy about how you progress. Like if you're just starting out, what are the first fencing things that you buy, and
Yeah.
what are the systems that you put in place? And so
Can I,
let's.
can I,
I was going to say
I'm
I'm
sorry.
going to go take it from there for a second, Matt. Give us like, so you got 100 head of cattle, but you're also raising other animals on your farm. So just to hit the point of multi-species, and then let's say I'm John Siskovich and I want to I when I grow up
Done.
to be a real farmer like Matt, and I'm going out to buy a piece of property, how am I starting to get to where you are now? Because your work is still hard. You still earn everything that you do. You've got something great set up, and I know you very well. I think you're a wonderful example. So let's reverse engineer a little bit and go from the beginning farmer, John, to where you are now, Matt. So let's start where you are now
Okay.
briefly. And then if you had to start over, what would you implement? And then I'll pick you apart along the way.
Sure. Tell you what, I'm going to tell you what we did, and then that's going to make this conversation interesting.
Perfect.
So, my parents called us, and we partnered together. They bought the 100 acres, and then we had a very small budget. Jarek and I saved up from our previous lives, and got into this. So I had 100 acres. We had about 12 cows or 15 or something like that cows, but we also had some pigs and we wanted to get some chickens, which we're going to take some electric net fences and stuff like that. So what do I do? So what I did first was I cleared the whole perimeter of my property, and to start, like I knew that I was gonna come back later and do a real fence. Okay. So I didn't waste a bunch of time clearing like the trees that were on the fence line. I went in like 10 to 15 feet and I decided to install a high tensile 16 gauge double strand steel electric fence around the whole perimeter of the property. And so I was on a budget. All right. And so instead of buying T-posts, I didn't do that. I bought 20-foot sticks of rebar and I cut them to roughly 2.5 foot sections. Although I adjusted it a little bit so I didn't have a leftover piece that I couldn't use at the end because every bit matters, you
Every
know?
bit matters.
And then
Every bit matters.
every
Any
bit
any piece
matters.
of metal, I'll never let go of,
That's right. Yeah. And that can turn into a problem later in life, which it has.
which it has.
And then you need to start throwing stuff away.
Yeah.
Um, once you become successful and can, fill up your whole tank of gas. Um,
Yeah.
and so I bought, bags of the little 3/8 inch rebar electric fence insulators.
Yeah.
Okay, so the rebar was 3/8 inch because that's the size that the insulators are made for. And so you buy a bunch of those things, and then you put in. So those are only good for straight lines. Don't try to make turns with those things because just bad things will happen over time.
Okay.
So you need to have corner posts. And since we live in East Texas, we have a lot of cedar trees. They grow just naturally here. They don't last all that long, but they last pretty long as a post. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I took a chainsaw and went around and cut posts that were probably about 5 feet tall. Okay. We're putting in a high tensile 16 gauge 2-strand fence. 16 gauge is very thin. It's very lightweight. And it's not real heavy. So it doesn't create a lot of, like the sag does
The
not
sag,
create
yeah.
a whole lot of tension on your corner posts. So I did not build H braces. I just simply took, cedar trees that were about 10, 12 inches in diameter, I almost said feet, 10 or 12 inches in diameter. And, you dig a hole, you put the post right in the middle, and you take bags of dry concrete, and you sprinkle it, all in the hole, You take a piece of anything, a piece of rebar, something like that, and you tamp that concrete down. And what you're doing is you're getting all the oxygen out of the concrete. And you'll know when it's done because the rebar doesn't dig in anymore. It's like this stuff is settled now. Okay.
Yeah.
So it takes a couple, man, maybe bag and a half or 2 bags per corner. You don't need an H brace with this little stuff. Okay. All you
Yeah.
need is a post. And
Can you hit me again with your measurements? How long is the rebar and how far
Mhm.
underground and how high above ground and corner post same question.
Yeah, let's say the rebar is closer to 3 feet. Okay, so it's in between 2.5 and 3 feet. Just do the math so that it falls in that area, and you can divide it by 20 feet somehow.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's 240 inches divided by 36 is about 7, I think. Anyway, um, the the corner braces, which are made out of cedar trees, or I mean, yeah, you can go to the hardware store and buy some treated, some treated 6-inch rounds or whatever.
Yeah.
8-inch would be better for sure. Um, but 5 feet's going to be okay, and you're going to put those in the ground about 2.5 feet. Again, this is all generalization. If your soil is so rocky hard that it takes you a half hour to dig the post, that means you don't need to go, the post hole. That means you don't need to go down as deep because that soil is settled. We have a lot of
Yeah.
sand around here in certain areas. So sometimes I'll do a video and I'll dig a hole and it's almost embarrassing how fast I can dig a hole. And it's like you're digging a hole at the beach, Matt. I mean, come on. Like go get some manly dirt.
Meanwhile, I'm on glacial tilth and it's all hard pan and clay and stone.
Right.
And if I'm with an excavator, I have to scratch with the teeth for a while before I can then scoop with the bucket because it's just
That's funny.
grinding away. And to try to do it by
Yeah.
hand is a nightmare. And if
Yeah.
you dig a 6 foot hole here, it'll take you a good long while.
You might as well bury somebody because it was that much effort.
There was a particular choice to that being a 6 foot hole because by the end of it you're like maybe I should
We're done.
just lay down.
And we do have some very rocky spots on the land, but a lot of it's also sandy. But anyway, this kind of a fence, we're not putting tons and gazillions of pounds of force on those lines.
Yeah,
So 2 feet, 2.5 feet is going to be just fine. Okay. And the concrete, kind of acts as a double barrier. It's not only, filling up the gap and making a wider cone in there, because the larger diameter of the cone, the more resistant it is to slowly creeping and bending over with tension over time. Okay.
yeah, it's like
But
having
it's
a
also,
footing like a footing on a foundation.
yeah, yeah, it spreads out the load a little bit. But also, in theory, it is going to help keep that wood from rotting underground because it forms a sealant protective barrier under there. So oftentimes I'll even put a little bit of concrete in the bottom first so that it kind of like cups it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then whenever I get to the surface, I'll take my hands, which you're not supposed to play in concrete, but I do anyway, and I'll mound it up and tamp it all around so it's almost like a slightly conical pyramid, at the top, so that hopefully there's never going to be water
It sheds,
pooled
it doesn't pool. Yeah,
at the bottom. There you go. Yep. So all those things are going to help a little bit. If you're doing the cedar trees or any kind of trees, you want to cut it at a slight angle at the top. So again, you don't have any water pooling up there because that'll cause rot to form at the top and it'll eat its way down into the stump and everything.
gotcha.
So anyway, I kind of got into the minutia there. So we were able to do this and fence in the whole property and you have to realize this was 16 years ago, so things cost like 1% of what they currently do back then.
Yeah.
But I think we fenced in 100 acres. It was either like it was either 600 or $200. It must have been $600. But I really
Woo.
am wondering. I really wonder if it was $200. Because I was able to buy 5,000 foot spools of high tensile wire. I think I got them from Ken Cove for like $60 each.
Yeah.
That rebar, those actually rebar is still fairly cheap if you go to the right spot. That rebar that was like 250 per 20-foot section. Those little crimpers were those little insulators were super cheap. Um, and then concrete, it was $2.50 an 80-pound bag,
Whew.
back then.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
it's not that.
not what it
So
is now.
it might have been a $200 project, but it was. And since then I have come back, like I said I would, and cleared around the outside perimeter of that fence and put in, like a nice mesh wire fence so that it's going to really slow down a coyote or a wild hog or even a big coon,
Yeah, for sure. How,
So that's where we started.
what's your above ground height then? Are you working in a 2 to 3 foot above ground?
Yeah, yeah. And so now remembering, I have good cows. Okay, I do not have wild cows. This
Yeah.
does not work for wild nutso cows. We move, and there's multiple things that go into a cow's demeanor. One is how often you handle them, but there's also a whole lot of like, what was mama like up here? I mean traits, emotional traits, if you want to call it that, get passed on through animals and humans for that matter.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
so that fence would not work for a nutso cow or one that has not been trained to electric fence. As I'm thinking about this, John, I told you wrong. I told you wrong. Yeah, you're cutting your rebar to 3.5 feet, okay? Because like you want the
Okay.
top of your fence at least 2.5 feet high, okay? So
Gotcha.
like you're probably even cutting it 4 feet. Okay, just forget what I said. We're cutting it at 4 foot lengths. We're putting it down. We're putting it 1 foot in the ground, the rebar, okay?
Yeah.
And it's sticking up 3 feet in the air. Let's just say that.
Perfect.
I'm sorry. This is 16 years ago, so forgive me.
That's fine. And that's fine because the general concept here where I want to go next, because we'll dive. I have one more like super detailed question because I'm obnoxious, and then I want to go into why would you start with a perimeter fence, and then how do you utilize that perimeter fence?
Yeah.
Because that's where you started, and obviously
hmm
that was important. So where do we go next? My my stupid thing is you're cutting all this rebar, right? You have to cut a whole bunch of it. Are you
hmm
buying multi-packs of grinder cutoff wheels? Do you have an oxyacetylene torch? Like what
hmm
it's how did you cut all that 3/8 inch rebar? Because it gets tedious when you have to do 300 cuts.
it does. It does. Um, and just disclaimer. So I grew up, and by grew up I mean in college. So I was an engineer, but I like went like the total manufacturing side of things. And so like by the time I was like a senior, I was like teaching all these other students in an impromptu classes in the machine tools lab, like, hey, this is how you use an end mill and and like a
Yeah,
machine lathe and stuff like that. So I really loved all that. So I'm really good with a grinder, is what I'm trying to say. Um,
yeah. Yeah.
but yes, you could cut that in one of three ways. You could either use an abrasive chop saw, which works great, but you're gonna invest $200, which is a big deal when you're starting. So maybe not, maybe don't do that. You can use an oxy-fuel torch, which again, that's a $500 to $1,000 investment with all the tanks and everything. Or you use an angle grinder and you buy these big 7-inch diameter, 1/32nd of an inch thick cutoff blades. Okay. And
Okay.
they are thin, thin, but man, they cut fast. And that would be the preferred method to me because this is what you do. You buy the cheapest angle grinder you can find at Lowe's, which is like usually a skill, and they actually last me really long. So
Yeah,
I don't know what
it's a
skill's
simple
doing.
machine. It's just an electric motor and a plug and a switch.
Yeah.
Like it's not
Yeah.
a complicated machine.
My switch broke, so now it's just a motor and a plug. So ready? Plug it in.
Yeah.
Um, now I am going to say this. Okay, you're going to be careful when you're cutting these things. You're not cutting all the way through. That would be a bad idea. As soon as you get all the way through, something is going to shift and it's going to bind and it's going to explode, and then you're going to have a knuckle that never is the right size ever again.
Yeah.
I'm showing you multiple fingers at a time, so I'm not using profanity here. But
Yeah.
I've only ever had one blade explode on me, and I should have had my gloves on. wear your stinking gloves. So that was almost an ER visit right there. But
Gloves and glasses.
now
Yeah.
it's just,
And
oh, please, face mask. Yeah, I never do it, but you should. Okay.
I had a piece of metal from grinding my bush hog drilled out of my eye at the optometrist, and I
Oh,
could see
nice.
my eye vibrating when they were drilling into it to get the piece of metal out. And my vision is fine, but like I was wearing a full
Well,
face mask and things still
oh,
happen. So
wow. Yeah.
wear the safety
Yes.
gear, people,
Yeah. Safety
please.
glasses. Yeah. Safety glasses. Even if you have a face mask on, the safety glasses are really important, secondary. And
Yep.
yeah, I still have my vision, thank God, because yeah, I don't know if I should.
All right.
But
So
anyway,
anyway,
so
yeah.
when you're cutting this rebar, you only cut halfway through or less in the top, and then you turn it out. Well, yeah. Okay, you can cut 2/3 the way through, but then stop there, and then you just bend it, and it breaks really easy. And
Yeah.
so if you line all your rebar up, especially if you have it up on a table, so you're not bending over like an old man like I usually do, man, you can just cut a line just down all those
Oh
suckers.
yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Does not take long at all. Super fast. And it's actually, for me, it's enjoyable. Put it in the shade outside under a tree, and you'll really um, uh, you'll love being a farmer for those 30 minutes.
I love the repetitious tasks that once you're set up and you've got your
Yeah.
system that you can just plug away for a while and like lose
Hmm.
yourself. I
Turn on a
didn't really get
podcast.
into like listen a lot, but sometimes podcasts, sometimes music, and sometimes just like going with the flow and getting into getting the work
Yeah.
done. And you can see like I take a physical action, I see a physical result, and there's the pile of uncut stuff gets smaller, and the pile of stuff that's cut gets bigger, and that feels really good. And the dopamine is
Hmm.
released, and your brain is like, ah, yes, you don't need social media. We can do this.
That's right. That's right.
All right, so
You are social media.
we got a perimeter fence, two strand
Hmm.
wire. How are we energizing that, and then how are we utilizing that?
Well, let me back up just a second. So
Oh,
you,
sorry.
you asked a question. You said earlier, now why would you start with the perimeter fence?
Yeah.
And it's hard to do because we as humans, once we decide this is what I've got to do, it's really hard to convince your brain that no, you need to think more logically and figure out what you need to do. Um, when we first got out here, was I doing high density grazing? Absolutely not. Because I had all this property to utilize and I hardly had any cows. And I need those cows to get fat as quick as possible. And that doesn't mean just abuse the land, but it does mean, hey, Matt, we can get this thing fenced in within a week and then turn them out to a big 40-acre section with a nice pond and just forget about them for a couple weeks while we're starting the next sub fencing projects over here, and I don't really mean forget about them. You still need to check them twice a day. But you virtually forget about them as far as your labor goes. You go out and you count them and you make sure everybody looks good.
Yeah, you've minimized your decision making at that point. They're
Yes.
set, they're there. You're still good to observe and learn and make sure
Yeah.
everything's functioning the way it should, but you don't have to finesse it as
Yeah.
much because you've made a
Right.
macro change and now you're observing and working on the other projects.
Yeah.
Happens a
So
lot
so
on the farm.
so forgive us, audience, if we overwhelmed you with all the minutia about high density grazing, pounds per acre, and moves per day, and everything. When you start, that's not where you're at. Okay, like you need to bite off. You want the best juice for your squeeze starting off, and number one is if you have unutilized land, get that land utilized. I'm preaching to my own choir. I need to go and get that 50 acres ready right now.
There's always one more thing to do. That's fine.
Yeah,
All right, so
100.
you got a broad stroke in, and then you got the cattle parked somewhere. What was that? Then what's the next step? What was that sub project?
I think well, our first full year of farming, remember how I said we get 55 inches of rain per year, except for that year, and the whole place went brown for the whole spring and summer. And then a tropical storm came in and it just gave us the wind, and then the whole ranch burned, like wildfire burned, like 50,000-acre wildfire, and we were in the middle of
Uh,
it. So then a bulldozer came by and ran through all those fences I just put in. So that was interesting. But man, I tell you what, like there is nothing like experience to let you see what can happen, and also when you get through it. And I attribute all this to the Lord's training in my life. But once you get through it, you learn, hey, you know what? I can get through that. And now you get to a point when you're 43 years old and you feel like you could do anything that you want to do. I
Yeah.
mean, I can go to Mars if I wanted to. I just don't want
I
to,
just
all
don't
right?
want to. Yeah, it's just not.
I don't want to. But no, seriously, it teaches you to learn to step through what are the necessary steps right now to get me um, to keep me surviving, as a
Yeah.
farmer or whatever. Okay, but anyway, so then I had to fix those fences, and then, and then we moved on to the next project.
So,
Um,
so
it-
you had a good idea of the first concept, and then like extraneous circumstances showed up and knocked at your door and said,
yeah,
"Hey, Matt, we know you have these plans, but also here's nature, and it's going to slap you in the face." So, assuming
mm,
that not everybody goes through that their first year, and we're generalizing our system to putting in that perimeter. But I love the detail of, like you have a plan and then you get slapped in the face and you're like, but all right, I can do it again. And I'm
my,
gonna, you try to plan
yeah,
around that in the future
yeah.
and
That's a
build some
that's a
systems.
Mike Tysonism right there. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And not to divert too much, but a little bit of like I do not have a 5-year plan. I sort of have a 5-year idea,
Uh-huh.
but I've just learned in farming that things change so fast. And the environment, the atmosphere. I mean, COVID was really what launched us into orbit. Like we
Yeah.
were doing okay, but we needed more growth. Anyway, so yeah, the next step was probably it was probably giving my pigs a more rotationally based plan because
Okay.
we landed here. It was like boom, paddock for the pigs. Okay, next thing. Okay, perimeter fencing for the cows. Okay, this paddock is used up for the pigs now. If we want to keep calling them pasture raised, we're gonna need a new a new paddock here.
Yeah.
So started developing that. Um, I now, and it took me about 15 years to figure out what's a pretty decent rotational fencing strategy for pigs. We went through everything. We did a lot of premier pig fencing, which is cheaper than the chicken electro fencing. So for those of you who may
Easier to
not
walk over too. You know.
Yeah, yeah. So for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Premier and a number of other companies, Premier One Fencing, um, they sell electro net fence, which for chickens, the squares are about this big, and there's an electric fence every, at the bottom every 2 or 3 inches, and then it gets to about 6 inches at the top with vertical stays, so that if a coon tries to go through that fence, it kind of gets stuck and then shock the fire out of before it decides this is a bad idea and I don't like chicken that much.
Right.
Um,
The
they
goal is
sell,
extremely discouraging. You know.
yeah, yeah, which sometimes works. But they sell a hog fence, which is a lot less strands and it's cheaper. Okay. Um, like I said, that we have so many weeds that grow so quickly. Even when we have that fence hot, it can get tangled up pretty quick if you leave it there for a couple weeks or
Yeah.
longer. So what we have developed here, okay, so we basically graze pigs in roughly 100 foot by 100 foot squares. And I can pretty easily change that to 200 feet by 100 feet or 200 by 200 or whatever. So this is what I did. I took some 12 gauge high tensile steel fences and
Uh-huh.
I cut them to length at about 101 feet, and I crimped little loops in the end of each end. So now they're
Okay.
exactly 100 feet long fences,
Yeah.
uh, strands of wire. And so what I can do now is I can go out to any paddock, or I'm sorry, any pasture or wooded area, and I'll take some T-posts and I'll drive them in just temporarily at the four corners,
Yep.
and I will. Um, okay, so I have two loops at the end of each fence strand, right? So whenever I want to join these two loops together, what I do is I take one and I just put it through a loop of the other, and then I find a stick laying around and I shove it through this loop and pull it tight, and they're connected electrically now because they're touching in two places, and I have
Yeah.
sticks all over the place because we have little trees everywhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'll take I use ratchet straps like from Tractor Supply or anywhere.
Yeah.
Just buy the cheapest ones, okay?
Yeah. Ones that can sit out in the field,
Yeah,
occasionally get hit by something, get lost.
yeah. And
Yeah.
and you loop that onto the fence. It doesn't even need to be on the corner of the fence, but I usually try to because I feel like it makes life a little bit easier. I put it on there and I wrap the other end around my T-post and do like a little slip knot,
Yeah.
and then I tighten it up. Zoop, boom. Super heavy duty pig paddock, and then I take plastic line posts that are sold at Tractor Supply or Ken Cove or anywhere like
All
that.
the companies. Yeah.
Yeah, and about I guess I put those posts about every 15 to 20 feet. If there's littler pigs in it, I do a double strand.
Uh-huh.
So there's one about six. So there's one steel wire about 6 inches above the ground, and one at about 12 inches above the ground. If there's just big pigs, one single 12-inch high wire is all you need.
Hmm.
Once those pigs are well trained.
And
So
now
that is
you're
my solution
connecting
for
that
pig trade.
to the perimeter fence. So your perimeter fence is putting enough juice through that wire to put it into your pig paddock as well as powering your 40
That's a
acres of
great
cows
question.
as well.
That's a great question. Yes. So I do almost everything is powered here by a mains um, electric fence energizer. I'm just walking over here just so I can show it to you.
For sure.
I think I'm using a 24 joule. Can you see that way over there? It's probably too far away.
I kind of see it. It's,
Yeah,
tough over
yeah.
Zoom,
So
but
so it's yeah, sorry about that. It's
that's
a
all right.
it's a 24 joule or 26. I think it's a 24 joule Ken Cove energizer. The reason I use them is they do seem to last a long time. And last time I bought them, they had a 3-year warranty on them.
Oh,
So
that's nice.
yeah, because I use that occasionally,
Yeah, stuff
Uh,
happens,
they,
and
o- they they often
farmers wear
do
things
last.
hard.
Yeah, they often do last 3 years or more. But occasionally you'll get a lightning strike that your lightning protection didn't work for, and it just blows the thing up.
Yeah. Now,
Melt.
we're gonna let's keep this light and approachable, and maybe there's a follow-up depending on questions. Calculations. You don't have to give me
Mhm.
the exact math, but what's the
Mhm.
process? Because I'm not going to listen to a podcast with two dudes just talking about fencing and get my exact math equations. Like I work with a fencing company around that,
You
and I
don't
think
want to hear about electromagnetic fields?
I mean, I do, but this is not for me.
Oh, okay. I got you.
You know, and
So,
I know that so I think this is a good segue just because so I don't keep you here all day into some of the general principles. So quick review, we set up a quick and dirty perimeter fence to run hot electricity all around the farm. So no matter where you are on the farm, you can tie into that. And now you've
right,
got that kind of like source of truth everywhere, right? And
right.
now I can piggyback off of that with whatever system for whatever animal. You got some flexibility plus that perimeter fence to put some kind of line of defense. Hopefully your animals are well behaved.
Hmm.
Um, Now you're running subsystems within that. How do I know I'm getting the biggest one? How do I calculate the ground? Obviously, that's going to be different because you have sandy soil, I have clay, I have standing surface water 12 months out of the year, maybe 11 and a half months out of the year. So I have very wet ground here or a
Right.
swamp. And so how are you starting to approach piecing that system together? Because if you're getting into farming or homesteading, no matter what you want to do, and especially if you want to scale, which is who this is targeted towards, you're going to have to spend
Mhm.
some money, and you're
Right.
going to have to learn some things, and you're going to have to do some math. And that's why APA exists, is to help you make the right decisions so that you don't burn out either emotionally and mentally or financially along the way, because people like Matt have done this and are sharing their information. So Matt, how do I start to put those calculations together to make sure that I'm set up for success,
Mhm.
even though I'm going to meet a lot of failure along the way?
Yeah. So here's your first calculation. If it's possible at all to do a plug-in energizer instead of a solar battery power unit, do the plug-in. Okay. You're not saving any energy or environmental anything by doing a big old lead DC whatever battery with solar panels made in China. Okay. We are really good at producing electricity in this United States, and it'll cost you a few pennies, a week to run a big old fancy energizer. So do the fancy energizer. It'll be cheaper up front and more environmentally friendly, in my opinion. If you can't do that, fine. Do a solar with batteries is fine. Just put it whatever you got to do. Okay, so as far as calculations go, I forget how many miles of fencing we're running out here, but it's a lot. Okay, and you always need to think of your energizer in terms of joules of energy output. That's an electrical term. A joule is a unit of measurement of energy, and it can refer to electrical energy or any other kind of energy, chemical, heat energy, but we're talking about electricity right now. Um, so whenever, you know, you can probably look this up pretty easily on Ken Cove or Premier One or whatever. They're going to tell you how many miles of steel wire 1 joule should travel. But if you're going to get a plug-in energizer, get at least a six joule. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Poultry fencing draws a lot of current for a hugely nerdy reason, but it basically is trying to induce every single line, every single electrical line that goes past one another whenever they're close. The magnetic fields are canceling each other out, which makes
Okay.
it, which draws your energy down. So I say that for every 100 feet of poultry net electric fence, you should
Yeah.
have a half a joule dedicated to that 100 feet.
Oh,
Okay.
wow. I mean, I'm
And
just
and
thinking
you
you could eat up the jewels pretty quickly
yeah,
with
yeah,
bigger
but joules are
flocks.
cheap. Joules are cheap, you know.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure, sure.
But I've got um my one paddock can be up to 6 fences. My other paddock can be up to 6 fences. That's 12. And then let's basically just double that with all the pig fences and everything. So 24. So that'd be 2,400 feet of poultry fence at a half a joule per. So you divide 2,400 or 24 units
Yeah.
divided by or times a half joule. It gives you down to 12 joules. So I need 12 joules dedicated to all my poultry and pig fences. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, and since I have a 22 or 24 joule charger, I've got a whole extra 10 to 12 joules just for the cows, and the weeds and stuff. So
Because
that pencils
the
out.
weeds will eat it up. That's part of keeping your
The
fence
weeds,
lines clear, is that when those
yeah,
weeds grow and touch your fence, they ground out, and that's stealing your jewels that might otherwise keep a predator out or one of your animals in.
yeah, got to save your jewels, John.
I do my best to protect my jewels at all costs.
That's very important.
Very important.
Um, so and I forget how many joules per mile or how many miles of steel fence per joule. You also have to remember this, John. If you have a steel wire that is conducting electricity down a straightaway, and it is like the only thing there, that
Yeah.
uses a lot less energy than if you have a steel wire that's right above like a goat wire fence or a mesh wire steel fence. Even
Hmm.
though the steel wire fence is not electrified at all, it is becoming electrified because whenever you transfer electricity this way, there's something called the right-hand rule concept, which you put your thumb in the direction of the current and then you wrap your fingers around, then it's generating a magnetic field in that direction. And
Okay.
that magnetic field induces a current into your anything metal that's close to that fence.
Huh.
So the closer you have barbed wire fences to that, and I'm talking like inches away.
Yeah.
If it's like 4 feet away, no problem. But if it's
Yeah.
within a couple inches or whatever, it is drawing current. It's stealing your joules, John. And so,
No.
yes, it's true. And um, so what I'm saying is a mile of steel wire fence transferring electricity this way that's held up by fiberglass posts and is not near anything metal takes a
Yeah.
lot less energy than a steel wire fence that is being held next to a barbed wire fence that's attached
Or
to the same T-posts. Because
yeah.
every single T-post is stealing a little bit of energy too because they're metal.
And they're
It's
driven right
pretty
into
it's
the
pretty
ground.
small.
Yeah,
And they're
yeah.
driven right into the ground. Yeah.
It's
Hmm.
small. It's one of those things that like, especially when you're raising like 10,000 birds, like you lose one bird and it's not statistically significant. If you're losing a little
Yeah.
bit to one T post, it's not statistically significant. It's when you see those trends, if you have a lot of metal that could be drawing, or if you have a lot of mortality in your flock, those trends and that aggregate, all those things coming together have a larger effect. And that's
Mhm.
it's part of that granular math that sometimes you do on the fly and sometimes you can plan out. Like in the fencing construction part of it, you're going to plan out where how much metal you're using. Are you using page wire? Are you using barbed wire? Are you using whatever? Um, are you using metal posts? Are you using wooden posts? Are you using fiberglass posts? Will come into those calculations that makes it hard to have a hour-long generalized podcast on electricity and fencing. But things to consider as you're putting it together, that this industry and this profession requires a certain amount of professionalism and you got definitely a lot of stick-to-itiveness. But the one of the downsides in agriculture is that anybody can plant a tomato in a pot on their back porch and or have a garden in their backyard, and that does not a farmer make. You have to operate up to a certain scale because if you're raising a chicken that you sell for $24 and you're getting a 25% margin on that, it's not a ton of money. So if you do the math, like 100 chickens sounds like a lot of chickens to somebody who doesn't raise chickens, but it's just not
Mhm.
that many birds. It's all these little details when you scale them up and size them up have a grand effect on what you're doing, what you're attempting to do, and how long you're able to do it because that effect scales with you.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. It's all about consistency and well consistency really. It's all about consistency. If you can we can get lulled into a false sense of security whenever we have 2,000 chickens because we lost one. Ah, it's no big deal. It's just one. And then that mortality can creep up to 10%. And there's a lot of profitability lost in there that you
Hmm.
could have if you just fixed your little leaks that are causing those 8 to 10% mortality.
For sure, for sure.
Hmm.
Now we've got a good setup that we're starting out with a cheap and cheerful system that doesn't have to keep everything in, but it is running electricity around the farm. And so now we have access solved. Now we have our micro systems with it doesn't matter, pigs, sheep, cows, chickens for meat, chickens for eggs. We can tee off of that, and we've got enough joules to keep us going. As we get towards the end of the podcast, regarding fencing, this is something I've asked you before and you've answered. But in our fencing discussion, what is one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out putting in that first two strand with the rebar and the cedar post?
That's right. One thing I know now that I wish I had known then. I think it would have to do with oxidation, John. That's what I would say. So,
This is one of my favorite topics, so I'm
oh,
glad you
really?
brought I'm glad you brought it up. Please
Well, I'm
do
glad,
continue.
glad.
which
Go ahead.
in the world of podcasting, who says that? Oh yes, please
Uh,
talk about oxidation.
Oxidation. I'm glad that my nerdhood is in good company. Um, so, you know, oxidation and galvanic effect, okay, which leads to oxidation. Okay, so oxidation is like in regular old carbon steel. When you oxidize carbon steel, you get rust. Okay, and
Mhm.
rust does not conduct electricity well, as you know, John, from Connecticut. Uh,
Everything rusts here if we're wet.
aluminum also forms an aluminum oxide layer, which does not conduct electricity well. Okay, and whenever you take dissimilar metals like copper and aluminum and you try to clamp them together over time, um, because of the galvanic effect, the thing that is more likely to corrode is going to corrode faster because you attached it to the other thing that wanted to corrode but stole some electrons or something like that. This is above my pay grade, John. But
Chemical
yeah,
processes happen, and there's
but
smart science that's happening, but the practical effect is less ouchy in the
yeah.
electric fence.
So what you want to do is just try to use similar metals. Okay, so your ground rods, never use a piece of rebar as a ground rod. Okay. T-posts also do not work very well as ground rods because
Especially painted T-posts.
those work like an insulated rod is what those work like. So
Yeah.
yeah, don't do that. Um, so your ground rods, which have to attach back to the negative end or the grounding side of your fence energizer. Okay, not your fence. Your fence should ne your fence your the hot side of your fence should never touch a ground rod. That would be totally against the point of what you're trying to
Yeah, yeah,
achieve.
it defeats the whole purpose.
Right. But so your ground rods that you shove into the ground 6 feet deep, or you pound into the ground 6 feet deep, you probably want to use a galvanized rod as opposed to a copper rod. Okay, if
Mm.
you're using galvanized steel fencing, so galvanized rod, galvanized steel fencing, because those two deals are not going to try to corrode one another. They're going to act as a single unit, and they're going to corrode. Um, more equal to one another over time. Okay. You probably should not be using copper connectors to connect, your steel wire fence to your poly wire fences that you're running for your cows or whatever. So like we're all very tempted to find a piece of wire. Oh, this copper wire, this will work great. I'll make a little jumper cable here to connect these two.
Yeah.
And it's going to cause problems because that copper is going to start turning blue because it's oxidizing, and now you don't have a good connection. Um, it's so funny. I'm wearing the Alexander hat here, and I I was at a regional event at their place last year, and it was a blast. We had such a good time, and
But
he asked me to do a talk on electric fencing, and I totally hosed him for this because like they had some copper wire that was like it was just corroded, and I mean, it was all in good fun. I was just joking with him, and I was like, I found this piece of wire,
so
and
the quick backstory, if you don't know, um, for I don't know, has it been 10 years now? Have been going to the annual APA conference, the poultry, I call it the chicken conference. It's easier for everybody to understand when I'm talking to the normies. And so there's the annual national conference where we all show up from our corners of the country and get together nationally. There's also regional meetups during the year where you could it's all within driving distance, and there's those local producers who are within that 2 to 3 hour range. But some of those regional meetups pulled people from further across the country. So Matt went out to Alexander Family Farm. Christian Alexander, currently the is the president of that? What's the title? President?
he's the prez.
He's the prez. He's the
He's the
president
prez. I'm
of
I'm the
APA.
vice prez.
And oh,
Of
that
the-
oh yeah. Oh, by
Yeah,
the way,
that's
I
why
got
we pick on
a
each
board
other.
member on the podcast today. He's
All right.
he's humble, so it's not a brag thing. But if you've made it this far into the show, you're interested in the topic, and if you want to learn further, I've learned some of the best information that I've gotten out of coop design as it relates to race cars, to fencing, by going to that national conference, but then also going to the regional meetups and then
Mm.
staying in touch with all these now friends and family across the country by text and phone throughout the year keeps my head on my shoulders, keeps me in tuned in what else is going on in the industry. And sometimes you need someone to lean on, a shoulder to cry on, or a hand to pick you up, and or somebody to slap you on the back and say, "Hey, good job," because you did something cool and you shared it with the group. There's no trade secrets in APA. We only trade our secrets. And
Ah,
and
that's a
so
good one.
Matt went out to a regional event at Christian Alexander's place, which in 2011 I rode my bike through it without knowing on a 6,000 mile bike ride, and found as the he was supposed to give a talk on electric fencing and found a piece of copper wire that was crossing two different types of metal, and he got to shame the president a little bit.
Well, yeah, and I got nicknamed Sparky at that event, so
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
So as a last thing here, Matt, there's a trick that you do where you grab electric fences, and maybe
Ooh,
that's
that's
I'll
true.
I'll tease this at the beginning when I publish it that if you stick around to the end, you get Matt's tip for grabbing electric fences and surprising all of the people with you. Can you walk us through the science of how you can walk up
Well,
to an electric fence and just grab it?
I can walk you through the science of what I think's going on, but I really don't know. And
That's
I
fine.
I, I,
I'll
I honestly don't think that anybody does. So I'll give you the lead up story here. So when I was in college, there was this guy named Rob Lanowski, and he was on my floor, and we were good buds. But he was this really short guy, and he was so loud. Like he was like the loudest guy on campus, just like bombastic, like just hilarious guy, really funny. Well, years later, they came out, a bunch of people from college, after we all graduated, they came out to the farm, and he was like, "Oh, electric fence! I remember this when I was a kid. This used to hurt so much." And I was like, he was about to grab the fence, and I was like so excited. I was like, "This is gonna be hilarious!" And he puts his hand on it, and nothing happens. And then he like wraps his hand around it, and he's just standing there. And I'm like, so he's like, we got in the army and everything, and so I'm like,
Is
all
he
these
just
things are
that
shooting through
is he just that
all
tough of a person?
all these things are shooting through my head like was this part of the army training to be able to absorb electricity by the thousands of volts or is it maybe his boots, he's got his combat boots on or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, years later, I finally figured it out, and yes, you can. If you have any rubber-soled shoes on, as long as they're not like cowboy boots with metal nails in the heels,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and there's a petition to change the name of those to horseboy boots, but as long as you don't have any nails that are like, conducting electricity really close to or providing a ground really close to your heel, and your boots are not soaking wet and they don't have any huge holes in them, you can just go up to an electric fence. I don't care how many joules it is. Well, I can. I'm not recommending that you do it, especially if you have a heart condition. Okay. If you have a
Yeah, yeah,
pacemaker, do not
yeah.
do this. I don't know what would
Disclaimer,
happen.
disclaimer to the audience,
Yeah, I'm not
pacemakers
recommending
beware.
that you do this, but I will go up and grab any fence. And the harder you grab it, the less it hurts. And I think there's a number of reasons going on. Number one, your body totally operates off of electricity. And 25 joules is like almost nothing. Like you burn tens of thousands of joules of heat energy every minute, just like
Mhm.
doing nothing. If you exercise, it's like way more. I think you can burn up to 1,000 joules of heat energy per second while exercising very, very hard. So like that just puts it into perspective. Now the issue is though the reason that electric fencing hurts so much is because it takes that tiny little amount of energy and it condenses it into a lightning bolt, which is really fast. And whenever
Yeah.
you have that much and that small amount of energy, but in like an infinitesimally small amount of time, then the power goes up to like the space shuttle. But it was just for such a small fraction of the time. That's why you don't die. Okay.
Hmm.
And so whenever you grab the fence, it prevents the spark from jumping. And so you have a few microseconds that you absorb that energy instead of like a few millionths of a microseconds, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
So yeah, so we have an electric fence right here. It's a steel wire fence. I'm just gonna grab it and like I can feel it,
Uh,
and you might be able to see my hand twitching once a second, but it doesn't hurt. But I can
yeah.
feel it, but it's not like now if I were to like loosen up and like
And slowly back. Yeah. Oh God.
okay, yeah.
I just
So,
clenched why this podcast comes out on audio and video on YouTube, and I'm watching the video. You're out on the farm, and oof, man, I clenched like I've been around
now if I
hot
were
fences.
to if I were to take my boot off and stand on the ground to do that, like I would scream. Okay, so I'm not going to do that, even though it might get a lot of views, John. You'd have to really give me a higher sponsorship if I was going to do something like that. Okay.
So
Well,
we're at the end of time here, Matt. I don't want to keep you too
yeah.
long because I know you're a busy guy. You got a farm full of kids, farm full of animals, and stuff to do. Last minute plugs. Aside from we've got some APA plugs in as you are the VP, and I'm a fanboy of the organization. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up today's episode?
Yeah, I like to draw this in as often as I can. Like the reason that we got into farming was because I developed ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune disease. I developed that like 20 years ago, roughly, a little bit more maybe. Almost killed me once a year for a number of years. And then we started learning about nutrition. And so I try to spread the word about that. It's not an easy recovery. It took me years to get over it, but I've been virtually flare up free and medication free for about 15 years now. And so if you need to hear about that or getting over autoimmune diseases, you could check out we only did one season. We were hoping to do more. Maybe we'll get back into it. But my wife and I did a podcast called The Farmily Life. Farm and family, stuff them together. The Farmily Life podcast. And we talk a lot about how we got into farming, but also every time we're sharing a little bit about that ulcerative colitis journey and just everything. It's a podcast about farming, family, faith, and food. So Farmily Life podcast there. I was actually just on another little podcast. It's called the Colitis Healing Path podcast.
All right.
And my episode will air July 9th or something like that. So 1 in 100 people are affected by this disease, John. Did you know that?
I did not know that. I
That's a
and
stinking lot.
nor would I have possibly guessed that
That
was
is
that high.
so many. Yeah, and many of the or ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. And I actually had both apparently because I was one of the lucky ones. And and I had a really bad case. I had like the worst case that you can get without having your colon cut out. Um, so anyway, there is hope. You can get over it, and I'm sure if you can get over this, you can get over any autoimmune disease. So, um, yeah,
That
there you
was
go.
and if you got one season in, but there's a fair amount of episodes there, and to listen to your backstory and Jerica's involvement because she was there hand in hand with you for most of it, is just absolutely wild. I know more about Matt's bowel movements than I know maybe even about my own kids at this point. But the lessons learned in it and the takeaways for designing a lifestyle around healthy living and being very intentional about your actions and how the effect that you're going to have on yourself and the people around you, I think is an amazing way to wrap things up today. Matt, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it. And yeah, until next time, I'll see you out in the field.
Thank you, John. Good to be here.